that was a unicorn, dude. That really was. When you think about it and you look at the fight and everything, you go, number 1 pound for pound versus number 2 pound for pound. Yeah. Looking at the lightweight champion against the featherweight champion. But, that thing turned out exactly how it should have been. And you got to look at both guys and say, fantastic job, because this is where everyone's going to be like, oh, Islam was supposed to dominate him, or, Volkanovski was going to. Those guys fought their asses off. Mm-hmm. Those guys had serious adjustments to make during the fight. The real part that was kind of interesting, if you look at it, and you've kind of talked about it, Islam's stand-up's a lot better than people give him credit for. Mm-hmm. And the southpaw stance and the size and distance that he was able to maintain gave Volkanovski problems, because Volkanovski had to make these mad rushes in there. He was trying to time these rushes to get his shots off, and he wasn't as comfortable as we've seen in the past. But, man, you have got to give it up. Volkanovski is just an Australian tank. Yeah. He is so tough. And I was looking before the fight, I was looking at things and going, I don't think Volkanovski's going to win, but I don't think Islam's going to finish him. I think it's going to go the distance. And I at least was correct in that assumption, but I did not think that in the end that Volkanovski would do so well getting out of certain positions. And you look at the physical strength to do it, because he's going back to the corner saying, nah, he's not strong. I love the mentality of him, because he doesn't let anything affect him. And yes, he's got a loss on his record, but Josh, that was not a loss.
No, he won over a lot of fans.
That is not a loss in any fashion. He's still the featherweight champ. He's got a great fight coming up, next with Yair Rodriguez. We'll talk about that, but I don't look at it in any fashion. He lost anything. And going into it, we talked about it. I thought Islam was the guy that had everything to lose, in the fact that, look, he was the champ. It was his belt that was on the line. Yeah. The pound for pound thing is, that's just media stuff. Yeah. But, and I even texted you right before. I go, Volkanovski looks loose. He looks good. He looks the same as he's always been. Islam looks tight. He looks, you can see the pressure. And you could, and there was.
Yeah, John, I'm gonna go in order here a little bit and just jump in anytime you feel like you want to interrupt me for this. We were texting back and forth, and you had texted me that, hey, Islam looks tight in comparison to Volk. And I said I was actually in the middle. Yeah. I just didn't hit send yet of saying the same exact thing. Look at him when he walked out for the Charles fight. He had a smile. He was ready. He was, kind of just like using his hand gestures. He was enjoying the moment and taking it all in.
Yep.
This was, you could tell all the way up from the weigh-ins yesterday or the day before, you could tell he looked a little bit stressed. He looked something like I said, it felt like he was carrying the pressure of everything. And when we had talked in the midweek, you're like, oh yeah, like this is kind of one of those fights. I talked about it, I said, I feel like that all the pressure's on him. He's the heavier guy. He's supposed to dominate. He's supposed to control this fight. I mean, he just finished Charles Oliveira with a submission.
Yeah.
I thought to myself too, I didn't see Volk getting out of the third round. And everyone's like, oh, how can you say that Volk's, not going to get out of the third round? Or that Volk's going to go that long when he finished Charles in round one? Because anytime you fight somebody that is like, shorter in stature, it's a lot harder to hold them down. When they push on the head and get you off of them, you're literally clearing their kneecaps by just straightening their arm. Yeah. When you're longer, when you're bigger, it's more to grab a hold of. I have the hardest time. I always had the hardest time when I would train with someone like a 125 pounder or 135 pounder, like trying to control them on bottom, because if they're good at all, they're just moving around. It's like liquid under you, just trying to grab them and get a hold of them, and they're grabbing water. Moving. And the worst guy that I ever had to train with was Justin Wilcox. Man, that guy was built like a brick shit house.
Yes, he was.
Super strong.
That's why they call him the silverback.
Really hard to hold down, just because his legs were so short. I mean, if he pushed on your head, you were already down to his ankles. It was one of those. He had long arms too, very much like Volk. It was just a different type of body style that you really weren't used to training with. And if you had that body style, they didn't have the abilities of Volkanovski. Obviously, Volkanovski's at a different level than any other fighter that Islam had to fight so far in the way that he presents threats. I also noticed that the speed was a big factor. In that first 2 rounds, even though I had Islam winning the first 2 rounds, in those first 2 rounds, you could tell the hesitation for Islam to throw and leaving himself out of position. He got nervous. He kind of like would just shell up so he didn't get hit. So he'd throw. If he missed, he'd clam up, for defense because Volk was faster. And anytime you fight someone who's faster than you, it poses that threat of, you're blinking, you're hesitating, you're expecting to get hit. And I felt like that was a big factor, especially in those first 2 rounds. And as he started to slow down, as Islam started to slow down, in terms of the fight was progressing, and he didn't have as much pop on his step, he didn't have as much pop on his punches, all of those things. Volk started being able to touch him a little bit more. Maybe they weren't rocking him, maybe they weren't hurting him. Some of them did kind of clip him a little bit. I get concerned that because the speed was so much, it had him thinking that he was going to get hit, and it made it look worse than it was when he did get hit, because it was throwing him off balance. He seemed like he just didn't have his feet under him last night. I was texting actually Habib during the fight too, and we were talking back and forth. He goes, I told him, I said, look, man, when I watched him walk to the cage, and I watched him, and I even told you this too, when he got into the cage, I'm like, he looks smooth. And I don't know if you guys understand what that means. I said he either overtrained, which is common, or he cut way too much. He had a really hard weight cut. Yeah. His body looks smooth. No he wasn't definition.
Able to fill back out.
Yeah, he wasn't able to fill up. His body just looked flat. And I'm not taking anything away from Volkanovski. I'm not making any excuses for Islam. He just didn't look. If you go back and watch the Charles Oliveira fight, he looked full walking into that fight. His attitude seemed different too. Like he had, I felt like, a lot of pressure on him for this fight. I don't think there was pressure on him for the Oliveira fight, but this is a lot. Like I said, like with the Patricio and the Michael Chandler fight,
absolutely the exact same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. Let me ask you this. What would the promotion do? What would Dana White do if Volkanovski beat Islam? What do you do with Islam? You just lost to the 45-pound champion. It's hard to market you as the best 55er in the world
when my 45er beat you.
When my 45er just beat you. Yeah. It's so hard to do it. Sure, Volkanovski would have made history. I get it. But in the Bellator case, right, with Patricio, he beats Michael Chandler. Now, how do I market to anybody who, a bunch of people are already naysayers about Bellator fighters. So how do I market to everyone that he's the best 55-pounder when he got knocked out by our 45-pounder?
Yep.
So that kind of, I think that pressure, that really, really adds up. And I felt like it showed a little bit in this fight. He's a better fighter than that. And I know I feel like a lot of people already know this. They know he's a better fighter than what he showed last night. But also Volkanovski posed John a lot of threats that he has never had to deal with. The speed, the ability to switch stance, the other thing, the durability, but also the talking.
Oh, yeah.
No one really has, I don't think anyone outside of Bobby, but Bobby got finished quick. But no one talks like that Islam's had to fight. Not like that. Like, he was laughing, he was smiling, he was hitting him like this from when he had his back. He was out there having a good time.
You know, if there's a fight that was reminiscent of this fight for Islam, I'm going to just put it out there, it was the Mansour Barnawi fight. Very similar in that Islam came out, was doing well, a little bit better, not huge, but landed some of the bigger shots, and that was the difference in the beginning. But Barnawi stayed there, and all of a sudden, you saw one fighter starting to slow down while one fighter continued on that path, and that was if you're going to look at Volkanovski was in shape. I mean, you looked at him between the 4th and 5th round, talking with his corner. And I'm looking at his diaphragm, and man, he's hardly breathing. You go, holy shit. Especially for all of the output as far as the grappling situations, how much he's pushing. A lot of him getting up was just pure power. Pure power, and we talk about it all the time, man, you don't want to do that very often because that's going to exhaust you. Bullshit. Not if you're a guy named Alexander Volkanovski, because, man, he powered out of things multiple times and just kept coming. And God, I'm so impressed. I know there's going to be people saying all kinds of stuff about, well, you predicted Islam, this and that. I did, because I just looked at the good big man and the good small man, and you look at it, so hard to overcome certain things that Alexander was going to have to overcome. But, I said it before Usman lost to Leon Edwards. I said, look, the number one pound for pound guy out there is Alexander Volkanovski. He is that good, and he proved it in this fight. Yeah. He proved how fucking good he is. Yes, it's a loss, but again, I say it's not a loss, man. It was a fantastic performance. I had Islam won the first 2 rounds. Volkanovski won the 3rd round. Islam came back and won the 4th, and Volkanovski won the 5th. I don't agree with the 49-46 score that was on there. I don't know how they had it. I didn't look up the judges' things, but I had a 48-47, and that's just the way it goes. It's that's the sport. It's by rounds. But if you're going to take a look, and you got to be honest about this, if that fight didn't have a time limit,
oh yeah,
Alexander Volkanovski was still going to be there, and he was coming on, and Islam was going to be the guy having more problems.